All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reasonably Good Life. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brooks, and I'm here with Patrick Kennedy, my intern, who's been helping me with this podcast and is a psychology student at the University of Texas at Austin. Hello, Patrick. How you doing today?
Good, Dr. Brooks. How are you?
I'm doing fine, staying warm. We got a little cold spell here in Austin, and just a little bit of dusting with ice shuts down the entire city. I know people up north will laugh at us, but we just don't have the infrastructure here to handle cold weather. Um, I'm not a cold weather person, so I'm glad this is all we get because I don't think I could take it otherwise. So we've been doing, this is episode 10 of the Reasonably Good Life, and we've been talking about suffering. And we did 2 episodes on that, and then we're kind of like piggybacking onto those previous episodes. And today we're talking some about attachment and identification as one of the things that can lead to suffering. So that's why we're talking about it. And as we unpack this, I think everyone will be able to identify with the identification that I'm describing and the attachments and how it gets us into trouble. Does that sound good to you, Patrick?
Sounds good. Works for me.
All right. So we'll just do a recap of the previous 2 episodes about like the 2 types of suffering. That there's this level 1 suffering that's baked into the human condition of we need, food, water, shelter. We need each other to be happy, to be functional. And if we're deprived of these, we suffer. And that suffering helps motivate us toward what is good for us and away from what's bad for us. So, if we're in the cold and because we just had a cold blast here, and it makes me think back to our ancestors who used to really have to just deal with it when they didn't have, heating and a roof over their heads. We're very fortunate now, but that cold caused us to experience suffering, because that was bad for us as an organism and could lead to our death. So it would motivate us to seek warmth to get out of the cold, and, food when we're hungry, water when we're thirsty, all that.
Right.
So we got that. So there's no way to avoid level 1 suffering entirely. Of course, we can make some smart decisions in life that can help us avoid some of level 1 suffering. But, bottom line is there's no way to avoid it all. We can't live in a little box or something like that. So we are vulnerable. The level 2 suffering is the one that we can do much more about and can get us into a lot of trouble. And that level 2 suffering is our worries about the future. What if this happens? What if that happens? So we spend a lot of time thinking about those things because we have a built-in negativity bias. So our minds by default drift toward the negative. And in a way, it's a good thing because it's trying to save us from suffering. Our brains are designed to help us solve problems and reduce suffering. And then things of the past, we can ruminate about those, dwell on them like something bad that happened, and it goes over and over in our heads. So this thinking about the past, the reminiscing but ruminating about bad things that happen or bad things in the present, just thinking over and over about how terrible something is, can make us feel bad, and we experience real suffering from just thinking about it. Likewise, worrying about things in the future can cause very real suffering. So just to make clear, the suffering is real, like we're really experiencing it. However, it's often exaggerated or unnecessary. So we don't need to feel it near as much as we do, but our minds get us into a lot of trouble. And that's that level 2 suffering that I think we can do a lot about if we can learn to manage our minds and our brains better. But it's very difficult to do. Like even as a psychologist, and we were talking about this last time, Patrick, where I freak out about things I don't need to and get really anxious and bent out of shape. So I'm not immune to it. It's a lifelong journey to try to reduce that. So, but I'm better than I used to be. And it's progress, not perfection. So that's what the reasonably good life's all about. We don't need perfection. Just can we be a little bit better each day? Can we have some more tools in our toolkit to grow, to learn, to improve?
Right, absolutely. So it's all about improvement, not, how are we suffering relative to somebody else, but maybe more relative to ourselves. So
Right.
level 1 suffering is the suffering that we cannot avoid. It's our basic needs. It's just a human thing. It's part of the human condition. And then level 2, as I'm hearing it, is the kind of suffering that we almost bring upon ourselves when we dwell in the past or worry about the future. So it kind of exists in our minds and is to an extent self-imposed.
Yes. Yeah. And I suppose, we can avoid a lot of level 1 suffering. For instance, let's say physical injury causes level 1 suffering. Well, if we're, I just watched Free Solo and things like where people rock climb without ropes and stuff. And it's like, oh my God. The Alpinist was another one. The Dawn Wall, some really interesting documentaries about, we could put ourselves in extreme situations that lead to loss of food, water, subject to the elements, injuries. So now those will cause real suffering. However, we sort of made decisions that put ourselves in the line of fire. So then we suffer more. Some people can't help that, like, I don't know, if you're homeless or something like that, the shelter part, you're going to suffer a lot in the cold, the heat, deprivation. But for a lot of us that are fortunate enough to have enough for a roof over our heads and things like that, that we can avoid a lot of level 1 suffering. Not all of it, but what gets us in more trouble in our day-to-day lives is that level 2 suffering.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there a level 3 then?
Well, there's probably, that's a good question, is like the way I think about things is I'm try to understand things in a way that I can put into use and move forward with my life. And so that's why, I don't claim to be right about all these things. It's just, is this a useful way of thinking about it? And so for listeners, if you're listening to this, you might have, well, what about this? What about that? And it's like, okay, there's exceptions to everything, but is there enough of this that you could sink your teeth into and put to use? I don't know of a level 3 suffering, and there's probably also a lot of writing on this where people differentiate the level 1 and the level 2, type of suffering, and they call it something else. There's existential suffering where you just think about death or something, and that causes some people to be depressed or anxious, just pondering our own demise or getting old and fear of that. There's names for those out there, but I don't know what everybody else is using. But we'll call level 1 level 2. If you think of a level 3, Patrick, throw it out there. Can you think of a level 3? Do you have a level 3 in mind?
No, I honestly, I don't know if I can get more complex than there's our basic needs, and then there's stuff that we impose on ourselves that causes us suffering. I can't think of anything beyond.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I don't have anything.
Yeah. And I'd say the self-imposed or self-created, it's not on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's that, our minds are just, busy, and they naturally gravitate toward these things. And so, in Buddhism, they call it the monkey mind, like our mind's like this crazy monkey that's like jumping from limb to limb, and it can jump into territory that's scary. on limbs that are, branches of thought that get us into a lot of trouble. And so that's where being able to manage our minds and our focus of attention's a really important thing. And we'll get to that. Like there's mindfulness, and it's a big deal in psychology these days. But we'll have another podcast on that. But I was thinking for today on attachments. So in Buddhism, and again, I'm not a Buddhist, listeners, but there's Buddhist psychology is a pretty big deal in the field of psychology these days, and whether they call it that, but or not, they borrow a lot of ideas. Like mindfulness comes from kind of Buddhism or Eastern thinking, although it is in every religious tradition or spiritual tradition, there's some form of mindfulness. So in kind of borrowing some of the ideas from Buddhism, because they were kind of like our first psychologists in a way. They started with life is suffering. And that was one of the Four Noble Truths. The first truth, life is suffering. And we talked about that. Well, life is beautiful too, but suffering, because I think, the Buddha when he was enlightened, he realized that there's this big problem of suffering. He knew that our minds gravitate towards suffering. There's the real that we have, but also our minds are just drawn to it. So we have to deal with the problem of suffering in order to be happier, because we're not very happy when we're suffering a lot, unless you're a masochist. I guess there's always exceptions to everything, right? It's like, oh, I'm suffering so much and it makes me so happy to suffer. So attachments is the second noble truth of Buddhism, is that attachments are the root of suffering. And I'm not a Buddhist, and if someone's out there listening who's studied a lot, they're gonna, probably find all sorts of fault with what I'm saying, because I'm not like teaching as a Buddhist. I'm just taking like kind of a general idea and then say, all right, how do we think of that in Western terms? How does it apply to our lives? And the attachments get us in a lot of trouble. Although, well, let me ask you, have you taken like a developmental psychology or child psychology yet?
I have, yes. I have taken a developmental psychology class. It was a while ago. It was a couple of years ago.
Okay. Do you remember, well, you had to have like an intro to psych, the Harry Harlow and the monkeys, was it rhesus or macaque monkeys? Did you study that?
Remind me what that is.
Okay. That's where so I think it's Harry Harlow, but he was a behaviorist and psychologist at, I don't know if it's Princeton or Stanford or someplace like that. And he was studying what happens when you separate monkeys from their mother, like baby monkeys from their moms. And what if you meet all their basic needs for like food and water and stuff like that? And he even had like a wireframe mother with like this terry cloth thing that the little rhesus monkey could hang on to, the baby.
Yes.
And
yes. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you know that? Yeah. I mean, now I just think, oh my God, that was so cruel. What they did it's very sad. It makes me sad to think about it, but like, yeah, they, in the interest of science, it's like, yeah, we got some good information out of this, but, there's some consequences, and you have to like, is it worth it? The knowledge we get out of this, I don't know. But the story is the studies are that separating the moms and the babies early on, even if you met the physical needs of the baby monkey, when it didn't develop correctly, the baby monkey. And so like when later they try to introduce it to other monkeys, it was basically kind of a basket case of like, it had all these anxieties and fears and stuff. So it got to this idea is like they're in attachment theory. Like if you run into that with the Bowlby, is it John Bowlby and Ainsworth? That they did the studies with, I think this came after Harlow, but like studying how kids attach to their caregivers. Did you study that stuff?
Maybe briefly, but I think you need to remind me about what that found.
Yeah, and well, so they had different types of attachment kids could have with their caregivers, and there were healthier attachments and then like unhealthy attachments. And
Mm.
so kids who are securely attached to their caregiver, when they separated the kids from their moms, they looked at how they separated and they looked at how they explored in the area. They looked at how the kid responded when it was usually, I think, their mom came back into the room.
Mm.
And securely attached kids, it's like a healthy relationship they have with their parent. And so, yes, they're dependent on their parent, but they know that their parent's going to be around. They know that their needs are going to be met. So they're able to kind of venture out and, explore their world a little bit. And if there's an insecure attachment, or it's, I forget all the attachment styles, but like if they're ambivalent, secure, there's
Disorganized.
disorganized. Yeah. So that would be where a mom might, reprimand a kid, their child who runs to her for comfort. And so instead of
Mm.
comforting, they get punishment sometimes. So the kid's like, wait, am I supposed to run to the mom and get a hug and say, it's okay? Or, don't be such a baby, get back on that playground. That's not, like the kids start to get confused. And so when the Buddha, and this all relates, is when the Buddha was saying attachments are the root of suffering, the psychologist in me was like, wait. No, we're meant to be attached to one another. Like no man is an island unto himself and stuff like that, that if we don't develop correctly, if we do not attach to our caregivers and loved ones, we evolve to be attached to one another.
Right. Okay. So Buddhism says that basically we're social creatures, that it's normal to have these attachments to people. I guess something that brings to mind for me is that, okay, well, can't we, kind of abuse those attachments, voluntarily or on purpose, to the point where it can become like codependent.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. I don't know what the Buddhist said, and I have some friends who are Buddhists that I could ask this, but like I did ask some, but like they weren't against attachments of any variety, but it's this craving, the neediness where, like you said, with codependency, in psychology, we're kind of looking for the Goldilocks, of like what's just right, what's kind of that middle way, that if you're extremely unattached or you don't care about what others think, I mean, you're a psychopath, like we have to care, like, oh, I don't care that I called you fat and ugly and you're crying in front of me, it's like, I don't care what you think about me. I don't care what anybody thinks. Well, that's not healthy. We should care. However, in codependency, the other person's like oxygen to us. So if they're upset with us, it's like our world is ending. Oh my God. Yes, we should empathize if we're their partner, if our partner's having a bad day or they're upset with us or we said something to offend them. Yes, we should care. But it shouldn't be like, oh my God, I'm going to quiz you because I'm a child of the 80s, and I'm going to throw some pop culture references at you periodically, Patrick, to see if you can get these. Okay. And so I have our first one, our first official one. I'm quizzing you. Now, okay. Listeners, we'll if you're old enough, you don't have to be a child of the 80s because it actually didn't come out in the 80s, but I'm going to use the line. And I'm going to see if Patrick knows it. You complete me. I'm not saying, Patrick, that you complete me, but that's the line. Okay, so listeners, don't get confused. No. Nothing. Do you know the movie Jerry Maguire?
No, never even heard of it.
Oh my God. Okay, Patrick, write it down. Jerry Maguire, Tom Cruise, and Renee Zellweger. But she had this line that was kind of oft repeated and became sort of a meme of its time. I think the movie came out in the 90s, either that or early aughts. But
so the idea that you're getting at is we can't depend on other people for happiness. That like their happiness can't always we can't base our happiness on their happiness.
Not completely, right? It's like, where is the line? Because there's these other lines of, happy wife, happy life. That's a mantra that I live by. If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So there is that like, wait, which is it? Are we, attached? And it's like, well, it's the not either or, it's the both and of, yes, we need attachments to be happy. The research is most of our happiness is in our social relationships. So the stronger our social relationships, the healthier attachments we have, the happier we tend to be. And listeners, you can think of your own experiences of like when things are going right with your relationships, you're spending time with family and friends and doing fun stuff, tend to be pretty happy. But if you're in conflict, arguing, someone broke up with you, harassed you, bullied you, made fun of you, someone dies, a best friend moves away, all those things, they affect us deeply. So non-attachment in the sense of I don't care about anything and anybody is not what the Buddha was talking about. And it's more this craving, clinging, and you complete me, like you're oxygen to me. Like I cannot be myself without you or this other person. And that's when people have like borderline personality disorder and things like that, where they like are so invested in the relationship that like, if someone is upset with them, then they're like, this neediness, this craving. But it's not just another person. We can be attached to anything. Like, here's another good example. We both, I'm also an alumnus of the University of Texas at Austin. And, I've watched the football for many years and, the sports, but mostly the football I'm into. And, there's ups and downs. And as a fan, it's okay to care about your team and root for them. But if they lose, it shouldn't be like you're totally miserable and you're, just beside yourself. Like it ruins your day, your outing, some people, it ruins their week or their life. I don't know if they're a football team or whatever sports team. That's when it's an over attachment, and sometimes they call it enmeshed. Have you heard of that? Enmeshed. So it's like when we're interwoven. We've become too clingy, too much, so that it should be. And the visual for this, folks, if you're just listening to the podcast, is like if you have a and a B, and A goes up, B goes up, A goes down, B goes down, but they're like so in sync. They're almost like they go together. What we want is where we're affected by things, we care, but not so much that if they go down, we go down the tubes with them, or, they win and like we're on cloud nine. Well, enjoy it. But when we're too attached, we become vulnerable, because when this other thing has problems or, goes down, then we're kind of powerless. It goes down, we're going to go down with it. We can't help ourselves. And that's when, the craving, the attachment is too much.
I see. Okay. So we have to learn how to detach from people and ideas and thoughts.
Yes, or not, at least not overly so. Politics is another one, where people, and sometimes they call it identification, where your sense of self becomes intertwined with this other thing. So let's take the most recent election, and we'll go back to this because there's so much negativity in our politics these days. And So if you're a fan of Trump and someone's attacking Trump, you feel like you're being attacked, and then you attack back because, or your party, like that need in us to defend ourselves, when it's like, it's not about us, it's about this other thing, but we've identified so much with this other party, this team, this thing, our state, our city. It can almost be anything. When that's attacked, we feel like we're being attacked because we're so connected to it.
Because
and
it's
so
part of our identity, right?
Yes, it becomes part of who we are. Our whole sense of self becomes intertwined or enmeshed. And that can lead to a lot of trouble. And that's why we don't, when the Buddha is saying, about attachment is the root of suffering, that's the type of, like, I must win this thing. I must, get into a certain university. If I don't get in, it's going to be a disaster. Now we've attached our sense of self to this thing, getting in this university or not, graduating, cum laude or not, so it's overly so. It's like fine to care about your grades, but not so much that if you get a B, you're miserable and think you suck,
Right.
That's too attached.
I guess a lot of fears that somebody might have when they see this, especially in our culture in the US, is, well, I need to be attached to my, my career, my job, my relationships, or else I won't be, a good husband, wife. I won't be good at my job. So I guess the question is, how do we keep that in check? How do we balance that?
Yeah. And that is, it's sort of the $1 million question, is that I think we're striving in life for some level of equanimity, where we care, we're, happy when our friends are happy, but not too much. When our friends are sad, we're sad. We can empathize, but not too much. The cares of the world, all the bad things happen in the world. We could care for, what's going on in Afghanistan or, around the globe, Ukraine right now, care, but not so much so that we take it on and we're non-functional, because then we're thinking about it all the time. And it's, well, oh, there's so many bad things. And, there's, stray cats that are not cared for. And it was cold. It's like, we'll care, but not so much so that we become immobilized and with it. And the same, with our partners. It's like, we should care. We need to care. And so it's not either or, it's the both and we need to strive to have some level of equanimity. And that's where the flexibility comes into place. When we're attached, we're becoming inflexible because we're stuck with this other thing, whatever it is we're attached to. It goes up like attachment to me. And, America is the greatest country in the world. Okay, well, that's some people's opinions. But if that's ever questioned, someone feels like, oh, you're not a patriot. You don't love America. You don't think we're number one. And it's like, well, let's have a little flexibility here, number one in what, how are we measuring this and things like that. But if we're too attached, we become too emotional, because when one thing gets attacked, we feel like we're getting attacked. And that makes us feel like we need to defend ourselves, when really is like, why do we need to defend if someone says America's not number one, or they don't like the Longhorns? It's like, well, if I feel the need to explain why, if someone went to Texas A&M and they said, well, A&M's better than UT, and I say, well, no, it's not, and they say, well, TU sucks and does the horns down. So being flexible and not, I could say, well, that's not nice. We don't need to go there. But if I start to get into screw you, Aggie, the A&M sucks, and here's why, you country bumpkins, and they say you T-sips, and it's like, what are we defending? It's like, the football teams when they're out there and we're cheering for them, it's like we get so wrapped up in them, and it's like, we're not out there. I'm not playing the football game. I don't even know the players personally. Like, they're not my friends. They're not my relatives. So, like, I can cheer the team, but I shouldn't get so bent out of shape that if someone says something negative, I feel like offended on a personal level. And I need to, hey, you say that again, and I'm going to knock your block off or whatever. I mean, people do that. They'll fight over stuff to the death sometimes over an insult. And it's, in a way, if you think about it, it's kind of crazy. It's like, what are we defending? If someone says, your mama wears army boots or something, you're like, oh, don't talk about my mama. It's like, why should I care? It's like, okay, we don't need to be mean about it. Like, that's not necessary. We can stand up for ourselves, but we don't need to come to blows over something and get so bent out of shape. And so the freedom comes from non-attachment. The liberation is, if I have this flexibility not to care so much, then I'm not a victim. I'm not powerless any longer. I'm empowered to say, and this is a power, I don't care. And but on a not like a flippant, like, I don't care, but more like, I just don't need to go there. I have no need to engage. You can, if someone's like pushing you and you don't resist and you just, push backwards or something, it's like there's no force meeting the force. Like, you don't have to engage. Sometimes you just sidestep and step away instead of meeting it head on and feeling this need that you have to defend yourself or whatever it is that you're attached to. That makes some sense.
So we have to keep our attachments in check and understand that the things that we are attached to are not us. They're not a part of us. Like, if we're
right.
feel attacked, we have to think, okay, is this me being attacked, or is this a thing that's completely separate from myself? And if so, like, can I separate myself from that and make sure that I react in an effective way?
Right. Exactly. In a way that fits the situation. We want, there was an Aristotle quote about that it was something like, to get angry is easy, but to get angry at the right person for the right reasons, for the right amount of time, the right level is not easy, and not everyone can do it. So we want our emotions to fit the situation. And when we get too attached, then we're vulnerable, and we start getting emotionally reactive to things that we really don't need to be so reactive to. We take things personally because we become attached to them. When we think about those things, it's even like, you felt defensive before, right? Where you get in an argument, it's like you can feel it. You feel defensive. One of those things, and being married a long time, sometimes I'll be like, what am I defending here? Why do I need to defend it? Like, I want to be right. I want to be right. So then I attach my sense of self to being right. My whole sense of self is, am I right or not? So then now I need to defend what I believe to be right, because if I don't, then I'm diminished in some way. I'm smaller, right?
Right, because we're attached to that idea that we have to be right, that we won that argument, or we won that whatever confrontation it might be.
Yeah, and it's like, but when you think about it, it's like, what am I defending here? Why do I need to do this? Sometimes I'll play that game with myself. It's like, okay, can I not have the last word here? If you've ever been in one of those where it's like, you want to give that last word, that last, and it's so tempting, and you're just like, then I'll be like, why, what's in me that I feel this need to do it. And that to me is part of this attachment, that we want to be free of, because otherwise I'm, good, being a victim. I'm, chained. I'm bound, I want to be liberated. And that's what the Buddha was teaching is this liberation, this freedom to not be so affected by things. There's a spiritual teacher, J. Krishnamurti. He was from India and he died, I think, in 1990 at like 90 years old or something like that. Real interesting, smart guy, wise. And I remember hearing a story once where he was like teaching and he was telling people, he said he has a little secret that helps him in life. And people are like, oh, wow, he's got a secret, he's going to tell it. Well, what his secret is. And he was like, I'll tell you my secret. And people are like edge of their seats, like, oh, wow, okay, he's got the secret of wisdom. He's going to tell us. And his secret was, I don't mind what happens. And I mean, I want listeners to think about that, like how profound in a way that is. I don't mind. Well, mind, because your mind is doing it. What happens? So what happens does not affect me. I am the calm. It's like on an ocean, you have the waves on the top, right? And they're, the wind action and things, they can whip up and they can be big and it could be raining outside, it'd be storm, But if we go under the water, it's pretty calm, We want to be under the water. We want to be the ocean, not the surface. And that gives us greater equanimity. We're not so buffeted about by the winds of change and what happens to us. That I'm just like spouting stuff, I'm throwing it in and seeing what sticks to the wall.
That's really profound. It's going to take me a while to process that one, but yeah, it's like we have to be able to separate ourselves from what's going on. To an extent, like we're saying,
to an extent,
all balance.
Yes.
It's all part of this idea of equanimity, that there's a middle ground.
Yes, the middle way is kind of this, have equanimity, so that yes, we're affected appropriately to the situation and that it's not over much. And when it becomes overly so, it's often because we're too attached, we're too identified with this thing, with a person. It can be anything, the flag, the, your sports team, your partner, it goes on and on. So it's care, be involved, be connected, have healthy attachments, but not enmeshed and overly so, because that makes us vulnerable to, the winds of change. That all makes enough sense. So, I mean, listeners, just think of your own lives and, when you get bent out of shape about things and when you get defensive, and, feel like you're being attacked and that you need to say these, come to the defense and oftentimes if we slow down, we can see we're getting bent out of shape, which is a type of suffering, right? When we're getting like all bent out of shape, is that maybe that our attachments are a bit on the unhealthy side. We're getting overly attached. And then that goes back to that idea of flexibility. One of the key things in life for us to navigate the challenges of this world that we face is being flexible, so that no matter what is thrown at us, we can pivot and adjust to what's in front of us. But when we become overly attached, we're tethered. And when we're attached like that, this over attachment, we're not flexible anymore. It's just up, down, whatever is, going on outside. Again, if you're on the surface of the ocean, you're just going to be buffeted about by whatever's going on the surface of the ocean. So that flexibility that we're looking for gives us this more of consistency, so that we're not tossed about by what life throws at us.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is about attachment, and we covered some identification. And again, this is like level 2 suffering, because I don't think, most animals have to deal with this kind of over attachment in their, like, they don't have their sports team to get bent out of shape about. And as humans, though, this is one of the downsides, is that we can get these types of attachments that cause a lot of suffering. So that's one of the things in life. And we're going to talk more about what we can do about these. And now one of the types of attachments, and I want to cover this next time, is ego. Our sense of self. So it's kind of a natural progression of this conversation to go from suffering to attachments and identification. And then one of those big attachments is ego, and how that can get us in tons of trouble. And so learning how to deal with that type of attachment can then liberate us from a lot of the suffering that we'd otherwise experience.
So we can be too attached to others, but then we can also be too attached to ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. It's deep stuff. This is this is the East meets West, but it's a fun conversation. And Patrick, it's heavy responsibility, but you're the voice of all the youth out there. So, you can throw anything you want at me as I'm talking about this stuff, how you're wrapping your heads around it, because there's other people like you out there that are probably like, what is he talking about? Or does this make any sense? Like, I want it to make sense because I think it is useful. So, but we'll keep the dialogue going and go on to the ego in the next episode, which will be episode 11. We've done 10 now. And I think do you have anything to wrap up with, Patrick? Anything to add?
I think that's it. I think that's enough to get my head around for now.
Yeah. Don't attach to whether you can figure this out or not, or make it useful. See, then that'd be another attachment. All right. Well, that concludes episode 10 of The Reasonably Good Life. I've been your host, Dr. Mike Brooks, along with Patrick Kennedy. Be curious, be flexible, be kind, and for goodness sakes, be reasonable. And we hope to have you back at the next episode. Thanks.